Horizon Giants from and this is the Battle of Kursk, Operation Barbarossa, Extra 3, Part 1 by the channel Extra Credits. In June 1941, Nazi Germany launched an attack upon the Soviet Union. The German Reich had been building up forces along the Eastern Front for a long time, but the sudden aggression caught Soviet forces unprepared. Yeah, the Blitzkrieg. Famous Nazi technique of Blitzkrieg. Basically, just attack suddenly before anybody can prepare. So usually the shock is enough to make sure that, you have massive advantage, right? People just panic and you win sudden victory. So that's a famous technique from them. Many troops were captured and the German quickly conquered territory from the Soviet states. All right. I just did, I guess, a day or two ago, Eastern Front video from Eastery, the channel. I guess this is that. So that's what Operation Barbarossa is. Damn, it's gonna be fun. Remember, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like, subscribe, check out the reaction, there's a link in the description. Check out the cards or plays like history with all my historical videos, including extra credits videos in it. Oversimplified with all my oversimplified video reaction, Urisaka production, internet historian, CGP Gray. Yeah, let's watch it.
Thanks to the folks over at Wargaming, over the next few weeks we're going to be bringing you an additional set of extra history episodes to talk about the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in world history. But first we need to set the scene. It's June 1941. For weeks, Nazi Germany's forces have been building along the eastern frontier. Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia have been working together since the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939, but that's all about to change. The ideologies, policies, and war goals of
Yeah, it was never, I guess, working together. It was not the thing. It's like, I guess, don't come into my way, I won't come into your way. Let's just stay peaceful for the time being. That was the thing. Because obviously, Hitler's basically all ideology, Nazi ideology, means that, Slavs, basically entire Soviet Union, is, beneath the Aryan race that he thought was way superior. So Soviet Union versus Nazi Germany was inevitable, basically.
Of these two nations have always been opposed. Tensions have been mounting since the exclusion of the Soviet Union from the Axis alliance between Japan, Italy, and the German Reich. Conflicts over the Balkans have been escalating. Peace cannot last. On the 21st of June, it's time. Panzers race eastward, tearing through the Russian lines. Surprise is total. Moscow's in a state of shock at the invasion. The Soviet troops fight bravely, but their leadership has been gutted by the vicious Stalinist purges. The Wehrmacht juggernaut cannot be stopped.
What? Hold up there. In August, 5 Soviet tanks laid a clever ambush.
By the vicious Stalinist purges.
They took out 43 German tanks without a scratch. 5 Soviet tanks took out 43 German tanks. That's big, man. He just said it by the way type of thing, just gave information below that. He should have talked about that because that's big. 43 German tanks.
The Wehrmacht juggernaut cannot be stopped. Thousands of Soviet planes are destroyed by the Luftwaffe while still on the ground. Within hours, the Germans have decimated any semblance of command. Suicidal orders from Moscow demand a counterattack. Soviet troops either attempt counter-assaults or withdraw piecemeal. Over the next few weeks, hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers are captured and sent back to serve as slave labor.
Oh god, yes. That video, the graph video from History, right? Eastern Front, it's just a map with all the blocks and things, right? In that, there was just really weird situation I was seeing that, the line was constantly moving towards inside Soviet Union. Nazi Germany was winning and they were trapping entire group of soldiers, 100,000 POWs, 60,000 POWs, 300,000 POWs. Like, what the hell? And I know what Germans did to the Soviet POWs, right? This is one of the famous thing I read a long time ago. Like, why Nazis were effed up. There was one of those points, like they, systematically killed all the Soviet POWs. I knew that. So as soon as I saw that POWs, I'm like, god damn, all those people are just fucked, basically.
In the German camps. And in the Balkans, the German troops are hailed as liberators by people looking west for salvation from the brutal Soviet regime. But not all is quite as rosy as it seemed for the
in the Balkans, people like, oh, those Soviets are basically killing us. I'm glad Nazis are here. Yeah, we are saved. That's our savior. It's not like they see us beneath them at a human level and they're basically going to kill us eventually. No, they are our saviors. I mean, you can't blame them, right? Stalin was really effed up basically to all of them. So if any force comes from the West and they're like, oh, we are saved, but they didn't know that it's even worse.
Nazi Reich. Despite the incredible losses suffered by the Soviet army, an unacceptably large number of Soviet troops had been able to slip through the gaps between the racing panzers and the infantry mired in crossing the muddy and insufficient roads of the rural European East. And despite the destruction of so many Soviet aircraft, the front the Germans were fighting on was simply too expansive to control, and they'd lost too many pilots and planes in the Battle of Britain. The Luftwaffe simply could not maintain total air superiority in the East. And whatever goodwill the people of the Balkans had toward the invading troops was lost almost instantly due to the ever-mounting number of Nazi atrocities, crimes against what they considered to be an inhuman race. For the rest of the war, there would be...
See, I knew that. They as soon as went there and they started to hang people, put them into camps or something, starve them. People like, oh shit, this guy's worse than Stalin.
Almost constant resistance striking the Germans behind the front lines as the army tried to push even further east. As the push east continued and the summer rains set in, the advance slowed. Meanwhile, the Soviets began to reorganize. The holes in the leadership left by Stalin's purges were filled. Competence began to trump ideology when appointing officers. The communication structure was improved, and some semblance of a coordinated battle plan was drawn. The first coordinated resistance came at Smolensk. Thousands of Soviet tanks rushed west in a desperate attempt to halt the German advance. 500,000 men on each side clashed in one of the largest operations to date. It was a disaster for the Russians. Hundreds of thousands more Soviet soldiers were cut off and shipped back to Germany as slave labor. Thousands of tanks were left
I'm not gonna lie, just seeing that Easter egg video, in that, how they were trapping, closing the flanks and trapping 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 POWs. That was just terrifying. But then I thought about it, wait a minute, Stalin is at power, Soviets. So, basically they just threw human life at them because Soviets, Stalin was not that, great of a guy, right? So he just threw suicidal mission type of thing. He threw the numbers at the Nazis just to win without actually checking the proper commands, putting people, proper, experienced people in charge basically, because Stalin probably killed them. So that's what it is. But otherwise, it's weird to think how they would leave their, flanks so exposed. The Nazis could just trap them and capture them in the hundreds of thousands in that number. Because probably there was no good person in charge, because all of them were probably killed by Stalin, however that guy was.
Burning husks in the Russian fields. But as much as this might have appeared to be a total German victory, the Soviet attack had slowed the German advance, costing them time and material that they could not afford, and splitting their command. Many of the German generals wanted to race for Moscow, to keep their forces concentrated and focus on the one objective that might end the war. Hitler instead ordered the army to disperse and capture industrial and agricultural centers around the USSR. By September, Nazi German forces were surrounding Leningrad in what would become one of the most desperate and probably most deadly sieges in all of history. What the Germans hoped to be a quick victory would drag out in a brutal battle of attrition for years. By October, bad weather began to set in, and the Luftwaffe's ability to control the sky became severely stretched. By December, the Soviet Air Force had even achieved superiority in some sections of the front. Though offenses had stalled on other fronts, having at last culled the Soviet army to the point where the Wehrmacht nearly matched it in sheer manpower, Hitler ordered one final desperate push on Moscow in the fall before the Russian winter truly set in. At this point, though, supply lines were a problem. Fuel, munitions, and warm clothing couldn't be transported over the vast distance between the German industrial heartland and the Moscow frontier in time. German divisions were undermanned, and replacements, when they could be found, struggled to make it across the bombed-out roads from Europe to the front. Still, the initial month of the offensive seemed a success. German troops pushed through the defensive rings around Moscow. By the beginning of November, forces of the Third Reich were at the very gates. But the troops were exhausted. There were no reserves. They'd been fighting continually in the ever-worsening Russian weather for months.
Yeah, that's Russia's biggest strength, right? First of all, it's a big-ass land, right? Nazis like, it's gonna be blitzkrieg, we're just gonna move it. Oh shit, it's way far away. We are not even close to the objective we wanna be there. So they basically just, try to lightning strike, just attack them, but obviously it's far away. Then the winter comes and just, basically Russians just wait them out. That's what they did with, in the Napoleonic time. That's what they did with the Great Northern War, right? They just wait them out, right? They take Moscow, they're like, fuck Moscow, we'll rebuild it again. Just runs away, regroup and attack again. Whenever winter comes, Russians suddenly get power advantage, apparently. Every time, whether it was Napoleon time or any other, whenever winter comes, suddenly the tide changes. Lots of people say winter was not the alone factor, this and that. Only thing I see is that winter came and Nazis were winning, and suddenly they are not now. They're getting pushed back now as soon as the winter came. That's the trend in Napoleonic time and every time.
Months. The troops needed to rest, but every day the Soviets drew in reserves from its vast territory to the east, regaining strength. By mid-November, the ground froze, and the final push into Moscow began. But the temperature dropped. In early December, it was sometimes as cold as minus 48 degrees Celsius. The fighting was brutal, and the winter itself claimed many lives. It was too much. The drive on Moscow stopped. Operation Barbarossa had failed. Then the Soviet counterattack began. Week after week, they rolled back the German line. The Soviet forces were better prepared for this harsh winter, and began to regain their footing against the freezing and exhausted forces of the once unshakable German army. But even as the German offensive stalled in the north...
the Soviets is like every year. It's like this is nothing new. Every year, this is the temperature year.
New objective was decided upon in the south, Stalingrad. By summer of 1942, the Wehrmacht began driving toward its new goal, and towards oil fields in the south of Soviet territory. By the fall of 1942, it was clear that the oil fields wouldn't be captured by the onset of winter, so all eyes turned to Stalingrad. The leaders of both nations decided this was the line. No land beyond the Volga, declared Stalin, and Hitler demanded that this city named after their foe must fall. Within days of the offensive's beginning, the Luftwaffe had reduced the city to rubble. But rather than surrender, the Soviets just dug into the ruins of the city. Fighting was brutal house-to-house combat. Grand strategy broke down.
Holy shit, enter town, city, whatever. Because, how many people died, normal civilians, because of Luftwaffe's bombing raids? Damn. This is one of the most effed up time, right? One side is Stalin, one side is Hitler. Basically, they don't care about civilian lives. They only care about results. They are fine with the entire, basically flattening entire cities if that's advantageous for them. Damn, that was just no wonder so many Soviets died, so many Russians died, so many Soviet Union civilians died. The number is just ridiculous.
Down into 1,000 small actions of a handful of men fighting for the bombed-out remains of a factory or an apartment building. But both sides just kept sending men into the meat grinder that was Stalingrad. By November, the Germans had pushed up to the very banks of the Volga. But even as German troops were approaching the Volga, the Soviets had another plan taking shape. The Germans had been so focused on the city that their defensive line along the front around the city had weakened. This German army had been so used to being on the offensive that it had let its defenses slip, and the Soviets planned to make them pay for that mistake. Soviet forces smashed through the thinly defended lines around the city, crushing the Romanian forces that were supposed to serve as the flank for the German 6th Army in Stalingrad. Rapidly, the Soviets closed the circle. The 6th Army was now pinned, with their forces from Stalingrad on one side and the Soviet counteroffensive push on the other. Initially, a breakout was suggested, but members of the Luftwaffe convinced Hitler that they could provide supplies by air to help the pinned army fight on. But it was nowhere near enough. The trapped forces began to starve. Every day, more of the planes so desperately needed for resupply were shot down. A push to relieve the forces was made, but stalled out, as the trapped forces were too exhausted to make a breakout, and their commander was unwilling to defy Hitler's order to hold firm. At last, the Soviets offered surrender terms to the 6th Army, but the offer was rejected because of Hitler's order. The trapped, hopeless troops fought on. Finally, by the first days of February, resistance collapsed. But even when personally captured, the commander of the 6th Army Group refused to surrender. As 1942 turned into 1943, with setbacks in North Africa and the imminent possibility of an Allied...
Damn, how afraid Nazis were of the Hitler, that in the normal situation, in any war, any time, people would basically give up as the strategically good position. Like giving up is the best answer right now. Even around that time, he knows that Hitler says no, so it doesn't matter what, even if we get captured, we are not surrendering. How fucked up that situation is.
Front in Italy, there was one last possibility for the Germans to regain the offensive and prevent a collapse in the east. Join us next time for the real beginning of the Battle of Kursk.
Damn, I didn't know Operation Barbarossa was that, Eastern Front battle, but this battle was just ridiculous. Obviously I don't know much about Soviet Union and their strategy at the time, but I'm just guessing here that knowing Stalin as is the main guy who's basically telling everybody what to do, and knowing that Stalin was so effed up that he basically killed most of the key military people, generals and admirals and whatever. That just makes sense that when they went to attack, how Nazis encircled hundreds of thousands and captured them POWs is because nobody properly experienced what at the field, because they were all killed by Stalin. That's just effed up. And Stalin basically just we can't lose, and just threw people left and right at the Nazis. At this point, Nazis and Soviet Union soldiers were not equal. Nazis were much more powerful, right? But only reason Soviet Union won because of just sheer number. Just throw people at the Nazis. That's why World War II death rates, if you see it, Soviet Union's death rate is just ridiculous. It's just like, holy shit. I reacted that, loss of life in, what was that? World War II video, some of the one. The fallen of World War II, sorry. In that, I get shocked seeing that how many people from the Soviet Union died. So, that was just horror after. One side is Hitler, other side is Stalin. Damn. It's just after to see how many bodies must have been lying there in the fields in that entire Eastern Front, from Germany to Soviet Union, in that area, because so many people died. Alright people, that was the Battle of Kursk, Operation Barbarossa History Part 1. If you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe so I know which type of videos to react to more. Check out the reaction, there's a link in the description. Check out the cards or different playlists, check out the end cards, and yeah, I guess I'll see you next time.